Thomas the Tank Engine is a character that needs no introduction. I'm sure that if you've clicked on this video then you have some amount of knowledge on who Thomas is. But he's not the only railway engine to have his own TV show. Another show I've been a fan of from a very young age is Ivor the Engine, a show about a steam engine who works on a small railway in North Wales. Whilst the original Thomas stories are quite firmly grounded in realism, if you ignore the faces, Ivor the Engine was a show that often contained folklore and fantasy elements, allowing the series to tell stories that Thomas and friends simply couldn't. They're very different shows with their own strengths, but as the two main characters are both locomotives, it raises the question, how would they look in each other's show? It's time to find out. When it came to replicating a Thomas style for this drawing, I haven't tried to replicate the style of one specific artist. There's some C. Reginald Dalby inspiration, but I've also tried to incorporate elements from the TV series, as well as TV series specific artists such as Owen Bell, Paul Nicholls and David Palmer. As well as giving Ivor a face, I wanted to draw Ivor's two main human companions, Jones the Steam and Dye Station, in a style reminiscent of the human figures in Thomas and Friends. I drew this warm-up sketch of the two of them before committing to drawing them in the main illustration. Ivor isn't based on a specific class of engine, and whilst some small 040 tank engines exist that you could argue look a bit like Ivor, I think it's more interesting to believe that Ivor's backstory is a bit like Percy's. A one-off design, with the documents detailing where and when he was built lost to time. Perhaps Ivor is some sort of Frankenstein creation made using discarded bits and pieces of other engines. His tapered chimney somewhat resembles those of old Midland Railway engines, and his flat-roofed cab looks a bit like those present on William Stroudley's locomotives. The railway that Ivor runs on is called the Merioneth and Llantysilio Rail Traction Company Limited. In its own show, Ivor has M&L RT Co Ltd written on the side of his tanks. Although I've shortened it to just read M and LR, this isn't out of laziness. The reason is because in real life, railways would often make their abbreviations quite short and to the point. For example, there was a real railway with a similar long-winded name called the Stretford-upon-Avon and Midland Junction Railway. However, the name was usually abbreviated to just SMJ. Then there's the elephant in the room, Ivor's face. In the original show, Ivor didn't have a face, and couldn't talk or emote in the traditional sense, but was still very much alive and would communicate in different ways. Despite not having a face, Ivor did have some features that were arranged in a way that kind of resembled a face. The front portholes are like the eyes, the fleur-de-lis symbol on the front of his smokebox is like a nose, and the ribbon insignia with the railway's initials resembles a mouth. I've tried to use these faux facial features as a starting point for drawing the face, with round eyes, a small nose and a broad grin. The latter makes him look a bit like Howdy Doody, but we'll let him off. It would be interesting to see how different Ivor the Engine would have been if Ivor did have a face. Morning, Jones. Morning, Ivor. Morning, Dye. Peep peep, hello, said Ivor with a face. Jones, why has Ivor got a face now? Well, I don't know, Dye. I went into Ivor's shed this morning and there it was. Well, you can't have a railway engine with a face. It says so in the rule book. You've got to get rid of it. Oh, but surely you don't want me to do that, Dye. It might hurt him. Did I stutter, Mr. Jones? Etc, etc. I've given Ivor a black smokebox as is typical of Thomas characters and British steam engines. Another change I've made was to Ivor's boiler mounting. In the show, this is his water filler cap, but since Ivor has side tanks instead of a saddle tank, it's just sending water straight into the boiler, which is not terribly realistic. So I've replaced it with a safety valve and drawn a filler cap on the top of his side tank. I suppose if Gordon met Ivor he would be quite wary of him, since Ivor is a domeless engine and therefore not respectable. And so, here is Ivor as he normally looks, and here he is in the Thomas and Friends style. This was an interesting challenge. Drawing Ivor with a face was an odd experience, but at least I had a fair amount of practice drawing engines in the Thomas style. Drawing in the Ivor the Engine style, on the other hand, it was all new to me. Ivor has quite an interesting art style. The show uses a paper cutout animation method similar to South Park, and the art style plays to the strengths of its animation technique to make it look like a storybook come to life. The colours are muted, but not in a drab, depressing way, instead helping to create a comforting, cosy atmosphere. The show's soundtrack really helps with bringing this vibe across as well. Unfortunately, I can't play any of it due to copyright, but I believe the soundtrack is available to stream on YouTube and probably elsewhere. If you've never watched Ivor the Engine, I definitely recommend giving the soundtrack a listen, or watching the show, whichever comes first. I was first introduced to Ivor during the turn of the millennium, long after the original show had ended. And whilst I was already accustomed to faster paced, wackier and more action-packed cartoons by this point, there was something about the laid-back, cosy, slightly oldie-worldy vibe of Ivor that really stuck with me, and I honestly think there should be more kid shows like Ivor the Engine nowadays. Also more kid shows with trains in them, because trains are cool. I've drawn Thomas in a location that vaguely resembles Farquhar, in so much as there were a set of terraced houses and an engine shed with multiple berths. In Ivor the Engine, Ivor's shed is depicted with what I can only describe as a belfry. I decided to draw the same kind of thing adorning the sheds in this illustration. I kept Thomas's shape mostly as is, albeit maybe a little shorter lengthwise than usual. However, in keeping with how Ivor is drawn, I've depicted the splashes and tanks hanging over the running board. I've also written the initials of the North Western Railway on the side of his tank. It's a bit of a fan AU cliché to write NWR on Thomas's tank and his number 1 on the cab side, but I feel like it was the best option here. In a similar manner to Ivor's quote-unquote face, I've given Thomas some sort of facial features. His nose is the North Western Railway coat of arms, and I've drawn a ribbon with the railway's motto, Nil unquam simile, or there's nothing quite like it when translated from Latin. I've tried to make the curvature somewhat match that of Thomas's smiling mouth. In keeping with the cutout animation style of the original show, I've drawn a slight drop shadow on Thomas and his driver. I've also tried to make the steam from Thomas's funnel look a bit like cotton wool. With all that said, here is Thomas as he normally looks, and here he is in the style of Ivor the Engine. And so, there were my drawings of Ivor and Thomas in the style of each other's show. It was definitely a lot of fun figuring out how each character would work using the design sensibilities of the opposite show, and I'm quite satisfied with the results. I may end up doing more style swap videos like this if people are interested, so let me know what you think. Be sure to comment down below and subscribe for more.